Hi, my name is Rob van Hal of the Q Gentrix channel. Now I just returned from a great hike in the Cevennes in France and I'm up and running again. Now maybe you have watched my tutorial about intervals or studied the e-book and learned all about intervals of the diatonic system. Now it's time to put everything to practice. Now maybe you know that most of the time intervals are used in chord theory, but this time I want to show you 7 short guitar solos, each dedicated to one single interval. And I hope this will inspire you to use and to think in intervals while improvising to get a different sound and maybe break away from the convenient systematic soloing that could slip into everyone's playing. But first let's listen to the medley of the licks before we look at them in full length and in everlasting glory. Let's see what's the buzz. Now a diatonic scale is a major scale or any mode that is derived from that major scale. And if you are not familiar with modes, then to you a diatonic scale is a major scale or the relative natural minor scale. Now within the major and minor scale we'll find 7 intervals. Practically an interval is the sound of 2 notes that sound together. Theoretically it's the distance between those 2 different notes. And some of them will sound nice, which we call consonant, and others will sound, well, not so nice and even unsettling, and those we call dissonant. From C to D, for instance, is a so-called second interval, and from C to E is a third interval. From C to F is a fourth interval. From C to G is a fifth interval. From C to A is a sixth interval. From C to B is a seventh interval. And from C to C in the next octave is surprisingly called an octave. There's one other interval and that is the distance from the note C to the same note C. And this is called a unison and it's used for instance in unison bands. Now, simple right? Yeah.
So let's make it complicated.
Except for the unison and octave interval, every other interval comes in different flavors. Some can be major or minor. One can be perfect or augmented, and another one can be diminished or perfect. Now, to make this crystal clear, we have to view the 12-tone system, which is the diatonic scale with all the half steps in between. So we have a minor and a major second, a minor and a major third, a perfect fourth and an augmented fourth, a diminished fifth and a perfect fifth, a minor sixth and a major or natural sixth, and finally a minor seventh and a major seventh. Now these intervals we're going to use in the next section. Now the minor and major second are both dissonant intervals. The interval creates lots of tension and needs to resolve to ease our ears. Although it's a dissonant sound, it can be used particularly for that characteristic. It's a means of expression to create a certain emotion. In this way I have used this interval to create the following licks. Now this is obviously a Steve Vai wannabe ripoff and a lack of creativity and authenticity. Anyways, the lick is played in the Lydian mode, which is anyone's favorite mode to poorly imitate Steve Vai and still sound awesome. Now the second intervals in the second part of the mini solo create a ton of tension that resolve in the pentatonic tapping part that in its turn ends in yet another second interval series, D sharp E and A sharp B. It resolves to the E power chord. Now the third interval is experienced as nice. It is a consonant interval. And this third determines if a sound or chord is major or minor. Now the solo is all based on major and minor third intervals that are played in different ways in the good old key of G major. The style is country, and it's been a month of Sunday since I played this style now. Now the solo and licks are Mixolydian flavored by the minor 7th F. And the third intervals are produced by double stops, bends and pre-bends that causes a laid-back country-like sound. Now the fourth interval is a very consonant interval and is used often in rock-based music. In this case I chose for a 70s Motown sound, so synchronize your dance steps and put on some glitters for these honey sweet licks in the key of C major, with some interesting harmonic deviations that characterizes this 70s soul sound. Now, as you can hear, these fourth interval licks sound very compact and robust. And that is the characteristic of the fourth interval and also of the fifth interval that we see in the next solo. So, the fifth interval is the inversion of the fourth interval that we have just heard. And that is why these intervals sound pretty much alike. Although the fifth tends to sound more open. In this lick I used a super basic tapping technique rather than pure fifth intervals. Now the notes in the figures contain the fifth interval but also a bit the fourth interval, and this makes this tapping lick super dense and compact. The last lick is based on pure fifth intervals, again in the style of Steve Vai. And I hope you can forgive me for bluntly yielding to my youth addiction, weak as I am. Now the sixth interval is the inversion of the third interval and sounds melodic. It can either be minor or major, depending on the shape that fits the chord. In the following licks I used both major and minor versions, and the common factor is with no doubt the slide that glues everything together. Now the key is E minor with a short change to E major. Now my goal was to find sixth intervals within the chords and make sliding licks out of that idea. Maybe you would expect that the dissonant seventh interval can't be used throughout a whole solo. And there is some truth in this expectation. The seventh interval is unstable, and therefore the series of seventh intervals wouldn't make any sense.
Wish there was sense. Where did all this sense go?
Still, it does make sense when you choose the right seventh intervals that fit the accompanying chords and let it resolve in one way or another. In addition, I chose for the Phrygian flavored progression by using the B flat in the A minor scale. This Phrygian mode has already some tension and a darker mood. Combining this with seventh intervals creates this dense and thick layer that suits this sound very well. the octave interval is the most consonant interval of all diatonic intervals. It is also the emptiest sounding interval because we're dealing with just one note instead of two different notes like in the other intervals. So the octave is mostly used to thicken the sound of a melody. Especially in jazz, this technique is common to use. I use the same backing track as I did for the sixth interval in the key of E minor with a quick change to E major. Now the melody is for the most part constructed out of chord tones. There's one special slide lick in the middle over the A minor 7 chord that brings some kind of speed and just a little bit of virtuosity in this solo. Here it is. I think you could recognize this sound from any old jazz guitar solo, right? So these were the 7 short improvisations, each dedicated to one single interval. Would you do this in a real song? Probably not. You might want to use more than one interval. But that's not the point here. I just wanted to show you what is possible with one single interval, so you can grab the ideas and combine them with other ideas. Anyway, I hope this helps you to expand your vocabulary and make some great music, and I'm sure you will. All tablature and backing tracks will be available on my Patreon page. I see you next time in yet another QGen Tracks tutorial.
Now shut up. I should shut up. Why do I keep talking?